Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Angela Puca, and welcome to my symposium. As you know, I'm a PhD and a religious studies scholar, more precisely a pagan studies scholar. And on this occasion, it seems particularly um, relevant to, to mention that. And this is your online resource for the academic study of magic, paganism, shamanism, and all things occult. As you know, on this YouTube channel, I disseminate academic peer-reviewed knowledge on the study of magic, witchcraft, and paganism. And I also aim at creating a bridge between the world of academia, the world of scholars, and the world of practitioners. So I'm really, really happy to have today a very special guest that I will be introducing in just a second. And before we start, please do know that this is a crowd-funded project. So if you have the means and can help at all, I would really appreciate if you support my work with a one-off PayPal donation by joining memberships, super chatting your questions if you have any questions throughout the conversation. And you can join my Patreon. It's an amazing community. Why wouldn't you? And also smash the like button, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Well, now we are ready to start. Are you as excited as I am? So our very special guest is Phyllis Curott. And let me bring her on. Hello, Phyllis.
Oh, carissima.
And I just realized that she speaks Italian.
Enough to get in trouble.
Yeah, but your pronunciation is pretty good.
Thank you.
So I'm really, really excited to have you, Phyllis, here on the channel. And as I was briefly mentioning earlier, I just have to express my gratitude, for your work, because being an Italian and having attended the pagan community for a long time, I can tell you that you and your work have been extremely influential for pagans, and they have, it has provided meaning, and it has massively affected the community. And when I posted about this interview, I got messages from my friends, my my all-time friends saying, Angela, you are really in interview Phyllis Curott. I can't believe it. So
Anytime.
so thank you so much. I'm really happy to have you here. How are you today, first of all?
I'm much better. I was in Scotland for a couple of weeks, doing all kinds of work. I'm the program chair of the Parliament of the World's Religions for 2023, which I have to talk to you about later. And so I was in all kinds of meetings with the pagan community in Scotland, who were marvelous and who've been incredibly engaged there. That's a longer conversation. And the interfaith community. And I was filming with a documentary crew and came home and got COVID. When I got back, my husband had COVID. So he's out here in this remote part of where we live, and he was sick. So I was sick, but I'm much better. I'm a vaccine and booster enthusiast, and I highly recommend it because I would have been much sicker if I hadn't had it. But I'm better now, and really, really thrilled to be talking with you. I really am.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I guess that my first question would be, how would you describe Wicca?
Uh,
Because different people, different Wiccans, and we know you are a Wiccan priestess and a lawyer, and as I said, massive influence in the community. So yeah, how would you define Wicca?
ha. Uh, I do a lot of defining.
That sounds very much like the work of an academic,
Yes.
defining.
Well, I was a lawyer, so my brain works that way. But at the same time, I'm a priestess, and so and a shamanic practitioner, and so a mystic. And I resist definitions because they put us in boxes, and the boxes then confine us and restrict us from having the experience of the mystery. And the mystery is always beyond definition. However, that's not necessarily useful. And Wicca has become the fastest growing spiritual movement in the United States, which is astonishing. I also have always called myself a witch. And I know people make a distinction between witchcraft, at least in the United States, between witchcraft and Wicca. So, we don't want to spend hours and hours on this, which one easily could, right? To me, what's most significant about Wicca, and there's a difference between the point of origin and the modern incarnation, right? And all of its myriad interpretations and forms now. But I'm really interested in the points of origin, the shamanic roots of contemporary Wicca, contemporary witchcraft. And that is 5,500 years old, at least. And we now know, we didn't when I started to practice. I was initiated into a neo-Gardnerian coven that was also very feminist and therefore very radical at the time, in the very early 80s. And we just called ourselves witches, but we came through the Gardnerian lineage. So it was this interesting sort of, traditional, British traditional Wicca or witchcraft already being stimulated and innovated with feminist American thought, right? So I was part of this cauldron of transformation. But to me, it's always been a living tradition. We didn't know, I didn't know at the time, the word witch and Wicca, which has become the word used to refer to the entire movement, was 5,000 years old, more actually, 5,500 years old. Bless the academics. I know that there's some controversy about this and some dispute at Oxford and other places, but it appears that witch, W-I-T-C-H, which appears in about the 1600s, just as the witch craze was really, succeeding in obliterating remnants of the old religion, that W-I-T-C-H appears for the first time. The word that preceded it, wicca, W-I-C-C-E, which is actually the word that I prefer to use these days in reference to myself, is a feminine spelling. Wicca, W-I-C-C-A, was referred to a masculine, and it meant a wise one, a seer of the sacred. Later comes this interpretation of Wittge, of bending. That comes later. But initially, it is a seer of the sacred. Essentially a shaman. It's the when you're talking 5,500 years ago, it's from the Proto-Indo-European, and it moved westward across Europe and ends up taking root around 500 AD. It moves across from Germany and Holland and etc. Takes root in what's now England, and really becomes the indigenous traditions there. So we're talking about a current of spiritual pursuit that moved throughout Europe, mostly Northern Europe, really, sort of more. I think that the Italian, Spanish, part of French moves up from the Fertile Crescent, but there, are these overlaps because we're talking about universal techniques, universal shamanic techniques, and therefore universal wisdom that's derived from their use. And to me now, you see these sort of essential practices, skills, techniques that are used by indigenous cultures all over the globe, and that were part of our ancestral tradition. And when you look, this is the incredible value of academic research, right? We're retrieving shards, we're recreating from bits and pieces. There's no way, right, that we can do what our ancestors did precisely, nor is it, I think, necessary. But we have the essential practices that open us, that expand our consciousness and our perception from our narrow human preoccupations into the context of a sacred world within which we reside, realms of spirit that become accessible to us, and that we begin to rediscover as embodied by the natural world. And to me, contemporary Wicca, in the way in which I practice it, is deeply shamanic. It's very experiential. It's not narrowed to a particular pantheon because because at least in America, we're all mutts. I have Russian and I have German and I have Norwegian and a little Dutch. I mean, all of that is a part of who I am now, and I'm American. But we have before us, I think, and this to me is the heart of contemporary Wicca, at least the way in which I approach it and practice it, the challenge to re-indigenize ourselves, to come back into a sacred relationship, not just with spirit, but with the earth as the embodiment of spirit. Without that, our future is grim. With that, I think our future is regenerative and full of life as it's meant to be. It's a life in harmony with a divine Mother Earth and all of her children. And so to me, Wicca is the modern child or great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchild of our indigenous, Euro-indigenous, and very shamanic ancestors.
This is interesting because it reminds me of the president of Pagan Pride Italy, that during an interview for my research, he defined paganism as the indigenous religion of Europe. So, and he was also mentioning the word parliament of religion.
Yeah.
He was mentioning the fact that this was being discussed and that he agreed with that point. And I think that maybe when we talk about indigeneity, it can be a bit controversial, but I also authored a peer-reviewed publication on how important it is to disentangle the category of indigenous people, which is a political category and very related to specific countries, from indigenous religion, so that the two should not really be seen as one and the same, so that an indigenous religion can be practiced by non-indigenous people, that the two categories should be disentangled. And that advantages both, I would argue.
Yeah, I think that one of the greatest challenges that I've seen in the United States is the hunger, right, for spiritual praxis, for an encounter with the divine. I think that drives most people into various faith traditions, and most Western and patriarchal faith traditions are very questionable in what they offer women in particular, which has been oppression, rather than liberation.
That they offer plenty of it.
Participation. And so I think women have been at the forefront, certainly in Wicca, in contemporary Wicca, of seeking a spiritual home that honors and respects them. And one of the wanderings in this journey for spirit, for revelation, right, and communion, was into other traditions, because people didn't realize that they had their own. So they were drawn to Native American traditions. They're drawn to yoga. They're drawn to Taoism, to other faith traditions, especially looking for praxis, for practice, for things that move you from abstract thinking into embodied experience. And what's marvelous is to discover that you have your own ancestral traditions. I mean, before we obliterated or attempted to obliterate the indigenous traditions of other peoples, to just oppress, suppress, and obliterate indigenous peoples and their ways of worship and their spiritualities and their religious forms and their language and their cultures, we did it to ourselves. That's what the witch craze was. It was sort of the final, there was Charlemagne in 1000 AD marching through Europe, obliterating a lot of what was left of the indigenous traditions up in the Scandinavian countries by sword. And then you had from the 1400s into the 1700s, you had the obliteration of what was left. Interestingly enough, there were far fewer persecutions in Italy than in other parts, right? Scotland had a huge number. Germany, the Protestant countries ended up having more persecutions, and you have the obliterations of the indigenous traditions, but they survive. They they become syncretic. So, and you found this in the cultures of in the African cultures, right? In the diaspora, when people were enslaved and brought to the islands and brought to the United States, and you find that the indigenous traditions survive by disguising themselves in Santeria and in Voodoo, where they take on the names of, you know, the Orishas and the spirits and the ancestors take on the names and the appearances and the guises of the saints. Right? This is true in Italy too. So we, you know, in the end, truth can be denied, but it can't be destroyed. And the sacred is embodied, appears. We've separated ourselves as far as we possibly can from the natural world, but now we're dealing with the consequences of that, right? So we are finding ourselves, you know, the direct recipients of our abuse of nature coming back. And so it confronts us with the necessity of reestablishing a relationship. And that's the point of indigenizing, that there are cultural, right? There are cultural forms and traditions of indigenous cultures, which we do not want to appropriate. But the more we find our own, retrieve our own, rediscover, reinvent, learn, because we have many of the same techniques, the spiritual technologies, and we have the same teacher. And so when we humble ourselves and we go into the natural world and we use the techniques to open our consciousness into spirit, and we ask to be taught, we learn. And the process of that is to learn how to be in a sacred, reciprocal, reverential relationship with the world that we live in. That's at the heart of virtually all indigenous cultures, not to glamorize them, you know. Many of them are patriarchal. They go to war. You know, we can't turn them into a fantasy, you know, an avatar fantasy of what we think indigenous culture should be, right? But we do have to set about the task of rediscovering how to be indigenous ourselves. And rather than appropriating from other cultures, it's wise for us to do our best to retrieve them from our own. And when we do that, we also come back into a larger community of indigenous cultures, and we find what we share. One of the most profound experiences I had years and years and years ago in Italy when I first arrived with Il Sentiero della Dea was at a New Age conference, and there was a young woman my age in full traditional dress. She was a Siberian shaman, and there she was with her drum, and there I was in my Armani suit, you know, the lawyer that I am, trying to transform the image of the strega, of the witch. And we had 2 or 3 translators. So there was somebody translating from her dialect into Russian, and then somebody translating from Russian into Italian. And then my friend Lorenzo Menegoni, Professor Lorenzo Menegoni.
I did field work with her for my
There you
PhD.
go. She was in the very first drumming circle to come out of Michael Harner's work that I was in. And then she was in my very first coven that I was the priestess of. And she was translating from Italian into English for me. And after about 5 minutes of this, we looked at each other, we pointed at our drums, and we just walked off into a quiet little corner of this massive conference space. And we started drumming rhythms, and, you know, and we recognized each other, and we shared the same technologies. And so we shared the same capacities for experiencing, for seeing, for learning from the sacred. So I mean, we're all indigenous to Mother Earth. If we'll pay attention, she'll teach us how to be indigenous. That's our task. I think that's our role. I think that's why witchcraft is the fastest growing spirituality in the United States, why it's taken off in Italy. And when you approach it that way, there's room for all the cultural nuances to be rediscovered and retrieved, and to the best extent that we can do it. So, you know, Italian traditions and Lithuanian and Scandinavian and French, and it's good. As long as we don't get trapped in, you know, fascist nationalism, we're good.
Let's leave that aside.
Well, I've seen it creeping into the pagan culture in both Europe and the United States. And it's, you know, we have an obligation to confront it. So we don't have to do that now.
Yeah. Yeah, but I can say that I agree with you politically. I know what your political views are, so but yeah, let's not enter that
That's my short answer to
story.
my long answer to your short question.
Yeah, but I was thinking about something that I heard you say once, and that kind of stuck with me when you said that people respect what they believe to be sacred. And so seeing nature as sacred allows us to respect nature, and see each other as sacred allow us to respect each other. So it also seems like a form of religiosity and spirituality that in a way is perhaps helpful in the in preserving and helping each other and being in a state of connection and harmony with the environment. I know that you're also an environmentalist.
Yes, I think that's very true. I've seen, because I work I've worked in the interfaith community for 35 years, 30 years, as an effort of banishing the negative stereotypes with which pagans and in fact, I prefer to use the term Euro-Indigenous rather than pagan. Um, with pagans and witches and Wiccans, continue to be seen. And one of the wonderful things that's finally happening, is this awakening within the Abrahamic traditions to and in some of the Eastern Dharmic traditions to the necessity of addressing this wound that we've inflicted on the planet. There was even something at COPS in Egypt. There were a group of religious professionals from the mostly Abrahamic faiths who put forward this ritual of repentance. But in positing, what they think is necessary going forward, they're still using the term stewardship. And that implies, right, the definition. I like etymology. I mean, the definition of stewardship is like that you are taking care of something, right? That you are the steward of it. Well, to take care of it, you have to understand how it operates, right? There's still this sort of implicit superiority, like we know what is necessary to take care of you, when in fact it's the planet that's taking care of us, right? And I think this is one of the gifts that we contribute to the religious world, that we experience, not just believe, but experience nature, to embody spirit, to be sacred, to be inherently of first and profound value, right? To be the teacher, and that we're not stewards, we're students. We're the children of the planet, not its. Yes, we have a role as caretakers, but not until we understand, what it means truly. And I think that even if we don't have the skills yet, right, because we're practicing a faith that doesn't give us those techniques to come into this kind of communion, if we can begin to see it as sacred from whatever your faith tradition is, say, you're Christian and God created the planet. Well, the source of creation is sacred. So then take the next step and say that the creation itself is sacred. If you can do that, your position starts to shift. You become more humble, which is essential to learning. And yes, what you see as sacred, you treat with great respect and care. And you understand, the limits. You are humbled. You are humbled. And that's the appropriate posture from which to enter back into a relationship. Yeah, I think you nailed it. I'm very touched that remark sat with you, because that which we hold sacred, we treat with respect, with care, with reverence. And that's essential now. It's just essential. I think that's the thing that contemporary witchcraft, Wicca, paganism contributes to the question of healing the wound and contending with this environmental crisis. It's the thing that's missing. It's that little piece that's missing. and that once people have it, you know, it can precipitate a very profound shift. That's the work that I'm attending to now.
So is this how you define Wicca then? A religion, spirituality that allows you to indigenize, which, if I'm understanding your definition, it means to reconnect with the earth and our heritage?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it's a little bit more, that it's a spiritual praxis. It's not a belief system. It's a praxis, a retrieval of ancient spiritual technologies that open our minds and our hearts, our entire beings, to the presence of sacred, to the numinous, and enables us to see, to recognize, to experience that the world we live in is sacred. You could say that it embodies spirit, right? And this is what shamans have always known, that energy and embodiment, that spirit and world are one. It's a continuum. It's a continuum, as opposed to the Western model, which separated them. And into that separation, that chasm, you know, we have plummeted and created a real kind of hell for ourselves, right? And that's a deep wound, to separate yourself from the sacred. So to me, Wicca is the path back home. It's a path back home to a sacred world, and the way to rediscover how to live in a sacred way, because you're living in a sacred world. And it's not an idea. I mean, I'm using words to express an idea, but I teach the practices to enable you to have the experience. And to me, that's what Wicca is. It's a spiritual praxis, so that you have the experience. And what you experience, you have confidence in, you know, rather than believing what somebody else tells you.
And what are the practices that would allow you to achieve such a goal?
Well, lots of time in nature, you know, just time in nature. Because when we're in nature, human nature is simply made better. We become more altruistic. We experience awe, which is, you know, soul activating and consciousness altering. You are in a context which changes you in good ways. People will put their lives at risk to rescue a stranger, you know, who's injured falling off a cliff. It's extraordinary. We just become, you know, we see baby animals and we're just like, oh, right? We're peaceful, we're calmer, our stress levels drop, our cortisol, you know, the hormones of stress, that the fight or flight hormones diminish. We get calmer, and people pay a premium to go, you know, to Fiji where there are no people, right? Or to go to Taormina, you know, and sit with the best possible view of the water, right? So time in nature. I've been saying for a long time, I mean, the very first thing that we did, that a lot of religious practices, Buddhism, yoga, very consciously, breath, right? And lots of people are doing breathing meditation now. That one of the practices that I was shown, I took a long time off to basically reapprentice myself with the planet and with Mother Earth. And the trees taught me to pay attention to what was actually happening when I was breathing. Breathing, I learned, you know, yogic breathing when I was a teenager, and I practiced yoga. When I got into circle, it was the first thing that we did. It's the first thing that I taught, you know, the calming meditative breath to quiet the mind and calm the body. And the trees were like, yeah, that's good, but you know, there's something else happening. And I was like, oh, the trees are talking. Okay. And I'd been in kind of a long depression funk because of what we were doing to the planet, and the sense of despair that was overwhelming. And I couldn't figure out how to get myself out of it. And the trees started to speak, basically. Mother Earth said, breathe. And I was choking on my own breath. I realized that I had stopped breathing, right? And I started breathing. It took a while, and I was calm and quiet. And suddenly I heard them speaking. And they said, "Do you know what you're doing?" And I was like, "I'm breathing." And I said, No. You're receiving the breath of life for us. Stop doing that exhale thing where you're like breathing out all that depression and toxic, because that's what I was taught, right? Breathe in the pure, clean, magnificent, life generating energies of oxygen, and exhale the carbon dioxide, the tension, the sorrow, the depression. Exhale your garbage. Inhale the pure, exhale. And the tree's like, stop! Just stop doing that. And they breathe in and feel the blessing that we're giving you. We're blessing you with the breath of life. And when you exhale, you're returning that blessing to us. The carbon dioxide that you exhale is the breath of life for us. There is no waste in the natural world. One thing becomes another. We create the breath of life for you, and I could feel them exhaling the oxygen to me. Breathe it in. Breathe in this blessing. Breathe in this gift of life, the breath of life that we create for you. And when you exhale, return it to us. We live in a reciprocal giving and receiving of the breath of life. And we're always connected by the breath of life. This is ridiculous. I've taught this a million times. And every time I start to talk about it and I start breathing and my consciousness gets clearer and I remember what I'm doing, because mostly we're unconscious when we're breathing, simply by bringing my attention to what is happening when I'm breathing, I am in communion with the plant people of this planet who are very wise, who are the foundational beings of life, right? Who give us healing and medicine and food and themselves and wisdom, especially the medicine plants, but all of whom are teaching us. And what they're teaching us is that we live in relationship, a relationship of mutual giving and receiving. And it's holy and it's sacred. And it really is true that the divine, which is this, right? That it's not a being, it's a process, right? That connects all beings. It's an exchange of life, of magic, of wonder. In the case of the plants, it's an exchange with the breath of life. So all you have to do is breathe. Go sit with a house plant and you breathe quietly and slowly, calm the mind, relax the body, and then you simply bring your attention to the experience of the energy, the quality of the energy, the blessing nature of the gift of air that you're given, of oxygen, and you exhale, and you do so with gratitude, right? Because receiving the gift of life evokes in you this feeling of deep gratitude. Right? When you realize what you're being given, you can only live 3 minutes without it. And so there's a desire to give back. And then when you're exhaling, it's a gift, right? It's magic. It's an offering that you're making. And in fact, it's the way nature works. There's an organizing principle at the heart of creation that came to me through practices, through journeying and breathing and being in nature, and casting circle and asking, what do I need to know? And Mother Earth sitting on her and grounding, which is one of our practices where we connect ourselves and bring her energy into ourselves and then bless her by sending our love back to her. And she spoke and she said, all living things live according to my wisdom, except humans. This is the blessing of the work we do, right? That we're able to receive direct revelation and guidance from the spirit of the planet, from the plants and the animals. They speak to us. That's shamans have always spoken to. Right? You listen. You don't speak. Actually, you listen to them speaking. And she said, all living things except you. And at the heart of how everything works, how I create life, how I sustained life for 6 billion years is very simple. All living things are meant to be healthy and happy. It's in your DNA, just like it's in the DNA of the dog at your feet and the oak tree in the garden and all of nature, everything that lives and everything that supports life, the water and the air and the soil. You're meant to be healthy and happy. It's in you how to do that. And when you do it properly, all living things, when they do it properly, it turns out they're making the world healthier, better, more welcoming. The biologists who confirmed this for me 5 years later, there are these biologists who specialize in biomimicry, studying how nature solves problems. They confirmed this, blew my mind. Just, I was like, so it's true. In taking good care of themselves, all of the beings, all the children of Mother Earth make the planet healthier, more welcoming. The biologists say more conducive for all life. That's a profound spiritual principle, a profound moral principle. Take good care of yourself. You're meant to, and you know how. And when you do it, you'll make the world a better place because you were here. To me, that's how we make magic. That's how you cast spells. That's how you proceed, right? That's how you live your life. That's the moral compass that's been missing of how we, using our brains that we haven't figured out how to use, right? Because we have to make choices. We don't rely on instinct like animals do, and a deep consciousness that plants have, where they're absolutely in harmony with their purpose and their planet, their role on the planet. We screw that all up. So we have to ask ourselves, when I make this choice, whatever it is, the food that I'm buying, the clothes that I'm wearing, the car that I'm driving, the energy sources that I'm using, are all of those things that I need to take care of myself to be healthy and happy, are they contributing to the well-being of the planet? So it's the next step from that which we hold sacred, we treat with respect. We treat it with respect, we attend to its wisdom. Its wisdom is all living things are meant to be healthy and happy, but to do it in the way that makes the planet better for all life. That's a step beyond stewardship. That's a step beyond sustainability. That's making things better. That's that evolutionary principle at work. And that's what's been missing, that we haven't seen that. We've been living in the opposite way. We do what we please. We think we're in charge. We think we know best. We think it doesn't matter if we do injury to everything else, as long as we have the biggest yacht and the fastest car and blah and all this nonsense, right? And the result of that is that we've brought the planet to the brink of destruction. I think religions come into being when the old ones don't explain the world properly, right? When the lived reality challenges the theory, the cosmology, the ideas about divinity. And I think there's a reason that this most ancient spiritual perspective is returning, because we need it, because without it we won't survive. And this is the way to come home, to rediscover who we are and how to operate this thing. Journeying. You asked about technologies. There's my drum, one of them. It's ancient. We did it. Our European, it was done in Greece, in Rome, throughout Italy, throughout Europe, up into the Scandinavian countries. The Sami shamans with the drums. It alters your perception. And to me, it's a very effective tool for beginning to expand our consciousness so that we have experiences beyond our normal human anthropocentric misperception, so that we start to see in a different way, to see the sacred. And it works. That's the thing. I like stuff that works. And it works. You start, when you think, oh, I just made that up. But when what you were shown is then shown to you in the material world, you start to realize that there are many more dimensions of reality and many more capacities for participating in it than we've used. And part of what you're shown is the sacredness of the world and the sacredness of creation, the accessibility of spirit and its willingness to work with us. And generally speaking, I mean, nature can be ruthless. There are viruses and snakes that will kill you, vipers and, and predators. This is not a Disney World. I'm not talking about Avatar. It's not a cartoon. But it's pretty damn amazing. It's pretty damn magical. It's pretty darn sacred.
Yeah.
And so that's what it's, to me, that's what contemporary Wicca, I think in part because I immediately integrated core shamanism into my modality. And that helped me to begin deconstructing Abrahamic remnants and from the ceremonial magical traditions and ideas of magic, of having power over and control over and, that kind of thing.
I was about to ask about magic and what is magic to you and how do you practice it?
Yeah. To me, magic is the flow of the sacred, of energy into embodiment and embodiment back into energy. It's in the Welsh, so I'll mangle it. They call it Nwifra, right? The Taoists use the word Tao while saying, that which can be named is not the Tao. It's mystery. We're always limited by our, human capacities to know what it is, to understand what it is. But to me, magic is sacred because it is that flow. It's embodied by the natural world, which is why working in harmony with the lunar rhythms, the tidal flows, the seasonal dynamics, the movement and the relationship between the sun and the earth, these massive migrating shifts and currents of energy, as we bring ourselves more and more into harmony with those, we become, more in harmony with the planet, more capable of seeing the spiritual wisdom that's embodied. Magic for me is not about manipulation. I think a lot of the approach to magic, I mean, if you look in so many, I just did a book called Spells for Living Well. I didn't intend to write a spell book, but my publisher asked me to do one. And so it was a great opportunity to sort of go back and look at all of this. And certainly when I started practicing, the idea of, like, wow, I could have superpowers, set my intention and raise the energy and shoot it into the thought form and poof, it'll materialize in my life was fabulous. And, sometimes that works. And sometimes it works in really weird ways, and sometimes it doesn't work at all. But over time, I began to recognize that a lot of our ideas about magic and ways of practicing were coming from ceremonial magical traditions that were very heavily influenced by Abrahamic perspectives of having control and power over supernatural forces, over nature, right? And to me, that's just a continuation of this patriarchal idea, that God's gone and, here, kids, here are the keys to the car, just don't wrap it around a tree, which is what we've done, that you're in charge, right? The planet's yours, do with it what you want. It's just a variation of that theme, Here's the esoteric incantation, the forces of creation, of magic, of wonder, of mystery, of spirit, are yours to command as you wish, try not to wrap it around a tree. And to keep people from wrapping it around a tree, Gardner made up, the threefold law that, if that which you send out will return to you 3 times over. So don't wrap it around a tree. Don't do anything bad because that's just a rule. It's just punishment. It's not even true, right? And it's certainly unnatural. It's just, behave yourself or something worse will happen to you. It's ridiculous. It's not appropriate for a spirituality that experiences the divine as embodied, right? You don't need that. You need the experience of being immersed within a sacred reality. That's more than sufficient to help you figure out how to behave. You want to behave, right? That's inhale, exhale. You are motivated. You are deeply moved to participate in ways that make the world better, because you recognize how much of everything is organized to sustain and love and support and nourish you. So you want to give back. I think that's what magic is. I think magic is bringing ourselves into harmony with that flow, of inviting it into ourselves, of allowing ourselves to be opened and moved and transformed and made better and healed and brought into communion with the sacred. And then you learn to shape it, right? To shape your life, to write a book, to sing a song, to have, a show on YouTube, to create a child, to cast a spell, to manifest a dream. And those things become your offering, your way of reciprocating for all of the blessings that you are being bestowed, all of the magic that exists to sustain and nourish and inspire you. And you reciprocate, and it flows into you, transforms you, and then moves through you back into the world, shaped into something meaningful, something beautiful, something valuable, something that makes the world a better place. That's magic.
So do you not see anymore magic as a way of widening our agency as human beings?
Yeah.
You do.
Yeah, sure. It
also
does.
To affect our reality, for instance, to alter events.
Well, it will. Which is why, or not, it may not. But the first thing magic changes is you. At least it should, right? And the one thing you can count on when you cast a spell is that you will be changed. You may not change the circumstances around you. You may have no influence, or you may have a very unexpected one, right? Or the changes that you precipitate may have a very unexpected influence on you. But the one thing that will always happen with a spell, even when it doesn't change things around you, when it doesn't seem to have influence in transforming realities externally, is that it's going to change you on the inside. It's going to show you who you are, what's important to you, what you need, what you fear, what inhibits you, right? Where your shadows lurk, where your doubts are, what needs to be healed, right? What needs to be learned, what's really important to you, which is especially true when a spell doesn't come to manifestation in the way that you thought you wanted. There's always wisdom in the outcome, even if the outcome is not what you intended. And that's part of the magic of magic, is that the first thing it changes is you. And then you have agency to change reality. But spells that work, spells that are constructed, and we used to, we would cast our spells, raise our energy, and direct it into our desires, the thought form, the image, the intention, the goal, without regard for where that energy was actually going. There's a label stuck on it. Oh, it's the Akashic plane. Oh, it's the realm of infinite potential. Oh, it's like, actually, it's the womb of creation, isn't it? It was very phallic. We're shooting all this energy, into the thing we want, right? Without regard for where it's going. Did we ask? Did we say please? Did we say thank you? Did we make offerings afterwards? Did we recognize that the energy that we are generating and putting forward is going into a living, organic reality that is infinitely greater than we are, right? Are we coming with respect and reverence? Are we asking, or are we demanding? Are we expecting, in this entitled way of infants, which is where we still are culturally and psychologically, in this infancy of entitlement? Or are we bringing ourselves into harmony and asking for the things that we need to live well, understanding we have a responsibility to take no more than we need, right? To be generous in giving back, to participate in this exquisite, mutually supportive, sacred reality that we're part of. So, yeah, you have agency. Are you using it properly? You're coming with respect and reverence and gratitude. One of the things that I saw early on that I recognized, because my shamanic work was bringing me through synchronicities and signs and circumstances, I was brought into the company and relationships, some friendships with Indigenous American people, South American, some African Indigenous practitioners, Yoruban practitioners. And I was seeing, there are cultural variants and there are always ways of seeking to have influence, but it was so much less important for them to be manipulating, to get stuff, and so much more important for them to be expressing gratitude. Gratitude. And I thought to myself, there's wisdom here, and this is part of what's missing from the modern way of trying to practice witchcraft and Wicca, that we're missing gratitude. Why? Because we're not really in right relationship. Why? Because we're practicing like fish swimming in the ocean that they don't recognize they're in, right? We don't recognize the influence of the old patriarchal 1,000-year-old model of commanding and controlling and self-gratification, and it's all about me, and right? So that's something that we need to attend to. It's not all about us. We're meant to be healthy and happy. Magic is happening all the time. All the time. We're just like, you can't survive if you're always in the magical mode, right? If you're always in an expanded theta, alpha, you can't, right? You've got to go shopping. You got to go to the supermarket. You got to drive your car. You got to make sure your kids didn't just run into the street, So you can't be in that state all the time, but we need to be in it enough to remember where we are. And to remember that magic is sacred, because everything is sacred, including us. And so when we cast it, the context has to be one of connection and reciprocity and responsibility, and above all, gratitude. And then I think that changes the way in which we make magic, what kind of magic we make, its efficacy. Yeah. I could talk about that much. In fact, I'm doing a 2-part workshop on spellcasting, and I think it's the next step in the maturation of people coming to this as as something that appeals to them. That they'll stop putting stuff in jars and sealing it with wax and figuring that they just made magic, and they'll start to think of where the stuff in the jar came from, and what the effect of their attempt to influence creation is, and how much they're already receiving.
Yeah, and I was wondering.
To me, a spell is actually a spiritual practice. It's not an esoteric manipulation of a machine. The universe is not a machine to be manipulated, with esoteric, and it's not supernatural. That whole idea of supernatural is actually it's Catholic.
Andrew, who is also the moderator of the chat, so thank you for moderating, he says, this is an interesting point. Do we treat magic as an automat intention in results out? Okay, automat intention in results out.
Yeah, the approach has been very mechanistic. It's been very mechanical.
And I was wondering, since you mentioned that magic can not work, so how do you relate that? does it make your belief in magic less strong,
Oh,
if
no,
that
no,
makes
no.
sense? Have you ever, questioned the
Oh,
belief?
yeah. Oh, you have time for me to tell you about my love spell that manifested my second husband? It worked. It was amazing. It was amazing. But I'm divorced, so
Mm.
it's it
So
didn't work out as I thought. It looked like it was exactly as I mean, it was amazing. It couldn't have been more precise.
I've heard many stories like that. Not necessarily ending in marriage, but
Yeah.
still.
And in the end, right? It wasn't uh it wasn't the relationship that was meant to be for the rest of my life, but it served its purpose, and it required an essential ingredient in the spell, and that was to discover who I really was and where my shadows lived, how to stop projecting them onto others, especially, love interests, to do the work here, right? To become whole here. And then I would be better able to find somebody, could be very different than what I thought. And it wouldn't require a love spell, right? Love is the greatest magic. It's just, you have to be open and ready. And that in time, perhaps the right person would come along. And so it was useful, right? It wasn't the outcome that I expected, but it was the outcome, as I was saying, right? That taught me the first thing magic changes is you. And the outcome of that spell was not about creating, this relationship that I thought was going to, but about creating the relationship with myself, which was essential, without which there could be no true, deep, mature, joyful love. Right?
So when you talked about magic not working, you actually meant that it works, but it just doesn't lead you to the final outcome that you would have wanted, like, the love of your life forever and ever. That's what you meant.
Yeah, well, and sometimes it just doesn't work.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes it's just like, it's like you turn your computer on and it's just like, you're not connecting to the internet. It doesn't happen. So why not? I don't think it's because you used rue instead of vervain, and I don't think it's because you did it at the wrong time of the astrological thing. Although I don't think it helps to try to banish at the full moon, which I'm so tired of seeing on Instagram, witches. There are real energies, right? Real currents of energy. And when we are in alignment with those and in attunement with those, the magic that we're working works better. Our lives as our magic work better. But one of the things you learn about attuning yourself to the natural world is that, there's winter and there's summer. There's slumber, sleep. The earth is not growing. There's no food out there. I mean, there is. I'm watching the deer decimate my evergreens right now because nothing is growing. But there are times of dormancy, and then there are times of manifestation. So, you're not supposed to manifest everything. It's fine. Also, people have a tendency to look to at the beginning. They go to magic to solve things that they can just take care of themselves. You don't need magic. I mean, your life is your magic. You are magic, right? So you want a job, get a job. Get your resume together, get a haircut, put on a good suit, get your skill set, get out there.
That's advice that I haven't followed. I'm not the suit kind of person.
You have to be a suit. You know what metaphor, right?
Yeah, I know.
We have a tendency to do that, right? It's like, oh, I'm going to go to magic, and it's like, no, you just live your life,
Yeah, but in some cases, for instance, if you want to do a PhD and you have no idea where to do it, well, if you get guided by magic to find out where you're supposed to be doing it.
Absolutely true. I mean, divination to me is a great magic, profound magic, wonderful magic. It can be hard to read for yourself. and to interpret, because we have a tendency to impose what we want, or our fears on what's coming to us, the message that we're getting. But divination is wonderful. I mean, it's in how it works is in the word, right? It's engaging in a conversation with the sacred. It's having a dialogue with the divine. It's asking a question and being given an answer. It's such a gift. And it's one of the things that was immediately destroyed by the patriarchal faiths, that you were not allowed to do that, right? That it was demonic. And it's one of the most powerful, immediate experiences of the presence of magic, right? That there's a divinity, a presence with you, that sees you and cares about you, and sees you with your scars and your wounds and your fears, but also sees the best in you, sees the potential, sees your power and your capacity to heal, to fix, to improve, to figure out what your dissertation subject is, to figure out whether you need to move to find a job, or whether the person that you think is, the right person is actually the right person for you. There's guidance. There's guidance, whether it's through shamanic drumming or runes, or that's where is it? You can see her. There she is. That's the pilgrim from the Major Arcana, the tarot deck that I created with Danielle Barlow, this incredible witch and artist, British.
Oh, wow.
That's a very different orientation than the traditional Rider-Waite Smith deck, which is what most decks are based on now. Totally different. The divine is present, right? And so we forget that, and we forget to ask. But that's one of the things that most young witches learn. They learn divination. They just don't realize that what they're doing is speaking to the divine. But if you ask, you'll get an answer. The problem is in interpreting the answer, because the cards are always right. The rune is always correct. It's the interpretation where we can make mistakes, right? So it's always helpful to have, I think it's helpful to have somebody else who's objective to help you discern what you're being shown. But yeah, there's guidance all the time. We just have to ask for it. There's a difference between a prayer and a spell, the difference between prayer and divination, because you get an answer. You get guidance. There's a voice speaking back to you. It's not just like you praying out. The answer is provided. It's magic.
And how have you seen Wicca changing over the years, since you've been, an active part of the community for decades, I think now?
Horrible face. Oh, I was.
No, I think that I saw interviews from the 90s. I think they were.
Yeah. I've been public since the 80s, and I started in the late 70s, and I was initiated in 81. Yeah. 80 or 81. 81. Yeah, it's really changed. First of all, it was hidden when I, which, I think you read Il Sentiero della Dea. I mean, it was hidden when I was led there. I wasn't looking, I was led. And if you looked, you'd have a hard time finding. Now it's everywhere. It's everywhere. I mean, how many views have there been on Witch Talk? Now, I don't know the quality of that, or Instagram. Although
I'm also on Witch Talk, as an educator, but still.
Okay. So that's it. There's quality. There are good people, wise people. That's wonderful. It's become the fastest growing witchcraft. Wicca has become the fastest growing spirituality in the United States, according to the Pew Research Foundation, which is phenomenal. The fact that you can even say that is amazing, because for years we had no idea how many witches there were. And I think we still are not 100% sure, but it's millions. as we become more visible and more mainstream, I think there are more opportunities for charlatans, although that was always a possibility, because without a centralized institution, there's never been quality control, right? Anybody, the more books were published, the more classes were offered, the more conferences were convened. Sorry about that. The more, you could read a book and say, oh, I'm a priest, or, I take 3 courses and say you're a priestess. That doesn't make you a priest or a priestess, right? And there's nobody to say you aren't. There are people to say, well, maybe you want to check their credentials and how long have they been doing this, and so the bigger we get, the more possibility there is for that. So our blessing is our curse. So we have to be attentive. Caveat emptor.
And in terms of the practices, how have they changed? Because I imagine that in the beginning they were more Gardnerian, similar to.
Yeah, I think they were more. Well, I still see it. I see it everywhere where people say, "What is magic?" It's the control. It's the using your intention to control or manipulate supernatural forces. To manifest your goal. That's one of the most common definitions I see in spellcasting books that are really popular. That's very Victorian ceremonial magic, from the neck up. It was all about your head and your recitations, which were very elaborate, I think, because they were men and they needed to oversaturate their brains with all this verbiage in order to shut them down so that something else could take over. My theory. And will, these very masculine things, the mind and, willpower. And that's still very pervasive. But I think there's an increasing awareness of the work as spiritual work, that, this is not about self-gratification. This is not just an esoteric system for mechanically manipulating the universe in order to get stuff, that we are not living in a universe that's a machine that exists for our pleasure, but that we are part of an organic and sacred mystery that we're meant to participate in sacred ways. I think there's definitely a movement towards that. There's much more attention to nature and to working in harmony with nature. And to being reverential in nature. There are many more people. I mean, when I started, I was the only one drumming and journeying. I was the only witch that I knew of in America, anyway, that was drumming and journeying. Then there was drumming everywhere because people were having these big conferences, so there were huge bonfires and lots of drumming. And now there are people doing shamanic drumming. There are people integrating. That's how we created the Witch's Wisdom Tarot. I mean, 40 years ago, I was the only witch I knew practicing core shamanism and journeying. And Danielle, 40 years later, living in England, knows how to journey, and we journeyed for every card. Right? That's a big change. That's a huge change. And that shamanic influence, I think, has really deepened the practice. A lot of people don't call themselves Wiccans. They call themselves like Danielle calls herself a hedge witch. People call themselves witches. They see Wicca as Gardnerian and as an initiatory tradition. We're back where we started. Is the label helpful or is it limiting? I think initiations can be helpful, but you don't need them to practice the spirituality. Although I do think that life will initiate you, and it can be very useful to have wise people who understand initiations as a spiritual praxis. It's growing, it's spreading, it's deepening, while it's simultaneously quite superficial, and fraught with mistakes. Things that I think are mistakes, like saying that you can banish at the full moon. I mean, that's not the energy, the literal physical energy of a full moon.
By the
And
way,
that's,
happy full moon to everybody.
yeah,
It is the first full moon of the year.
yay, of the new year.
Yeah.
Fab. I think, I think it's deepening as it widens. I think, it becomes more superficial and fraught with mistakes. But because there are so many more people practicing it in deep, sacred, spiritual ways, that's the trend that I think is going to carry it forward. And that's where the gift that it has to offer the world resides, right? In that depth. It's not in the jar with the stuff in it. It's in the capacity to be in the presence of the sacred, to find it inside of you, and to be in this really profound, sacred, divinely magical relationship, and to finally come home to that. I think that's where we're headed. And I do see more and more of that. So I'm optimistic. I also see lots of, there are lots of variations cropping up, right? And traditions and, people practicing for 5 years, 10 years, building community, creating traditions around that. And you always see Gardnerian elements because that's where it started. But at the heart of the Gardnerian elements are these, universal shamanic things: the casting of a circle, the honoring of the 4 directions above, below, and at the center, the creation of an altar, working with the elements. I'm happy to see people doing a lot. When we started, we were commanding and controlling. I summon, stir, and call you up, mighty ones of the east, powers of the air, guardians of the watchtowers, very ceremonial. Commanding, controlling. I summon, stir, and call you up. And, I stopped doing that a long time ago, and I see a lot more people who are far more what I would call shamanic, where they're inviting the elements, right? They're not commanding or trying to control. They're seeking to commune and to create with. That's a shift. I mean, that's something. Language is very important. And I look at my second book, Witchcrafting, and I think I used and I'm not even sure, maybe the Wicca Made Easy, that I might have used the word use air. I think by then, I hope by then I changed it, but to use the elements, right? Very patriarchal. I'm going to use the air for my magic. I'm going to use the fire for the magic that I want to do for my spell casting. It's like, nope. Took a long time for that shift in dynamic to really take root, and then to recognize that the language didn't reflect the change in the relationship or the dynamic, so that you're working with the elements rather than commanding or trying to control or manipulate them, that you're not trying to have power over anything except yourself. You're trying to enter into a relationship. You're asking for help. You're asking for your powers to be expanded by the blessings, the powers, the gifts of air, of plants, of animals, of earth, of fire, of water. And you're grateful, right? And that gratitude then asks that you reciprocate, that you not manipulate, you reciprocate. Different. I'd like to see more of that. I think in time there'll be more of that, and that's an Indigenous perspective.
And an indigenizing one, as you said in the beginning.
Yes, exactly. I thought I turned that off. Yes, that is right. It's the experience that transforms the perspective, and then we think critically and try to change our vocabulary because certain, words or gestures. I mean, I was taught summon, stir, and we were gesturing out there. And it took me years to recognize that the earth is not out there. There might be mountains up and out, but the earth is under my feet, right? Kneel down, touch the earth. Takes time. Takes time to wake up to the water you're swimming in and to start to, transform how you swim. But I think we're doing good. I don't know. Are we going to get there in time? No, that's the thing I worry about. I'm a little old for the use of. I think it's possible because social media is astonishing, right? and you can reach so many people so quickly. So I think it is possible to begin to have an impact, because it's not just about a change in Wicca, it's about the change in Wicca's impact, or witchcraft's impact, or paganism's impact on the broader culture.
Yeah, I think it's already happening.
I hope so. I hope so. I think so. I mean, I can see some critical things that we need to do, and some critical conversations where we need to be present, where we need to be affecting the vocabulary, the thinking, the relationship, the vocabulary of other people. Good that you're repenting. Not enough if you still think you're going to steward the earth, you know? So I think that critical component of offering, because you don't have to be aware. This is the thing that I think is, thank you for being so indulgent and letting me over talk, but I think that one of the things that we contribute is the recognition that a practice doesn't require, you don't have to be a witch to breathe and be in communion with the plants and the planet, right? Because we're all doing it. You don't have to be a witch, in fact, to make magic, to cast a spell, to use the spiritual practices that I think are at the heart of what we're doing and why we're doing them. Just like you don't have to be Buddhist to meditate, or Hindu to practice yoga and to benefit from the spiritual practices. I think you don't have to be a witch. You certainly don't have to be a shaman. It's not a word, that we use to refer to ourselves. If somebody else used that to describe us or what we do, but we're careful about appropriation, right, and making distinctions. But I'm very comfortable saying I'm a witch, but you don't have to be a witch to use the practices. So that's a gift that we can give to the world, right? The wisdom that comes from those practices we can share. You don't have to be initiated. You can just learn how to breathe with the plants. You can learn how to honor the four directions. You can learn how to work with air, to work with fire, with sun, to experience gratitude and reciprocity, to journey. All these things are practices that people can use. The experiences that they have and the conclusions that they come to will challenge, I think, some elements of Abrahamic belief and practice and behavior. But that would be a good thing. Yeah, that'd be a good thing. Because Jesus and love good, God someplace else, and man having dominion over the earth, not good. Not helpful. Not useful. Not helpful. Not accurate. So I think that we're bringing something that's been missing and that's essential. That I think is changing. That's one of the ways I think that Wicca is changing. When we started, you absolutely, it was, and we still are. We're not. We don't proselytize, right? We're not trying to get millions of people to come. Well, I am.
You're proselytizing.
Oh yeah, I confess.
Definitely not a fan of Abrahamic religions.
Yeah. Right. But what I'm proselytizing is practice, right? I'm proselytizing your capacity to have the experience, not believe what I'm saying, but have the experience yourself. And I think that's a change. I think that in the past we were hidden, and now we're in plain view. In the past we were afraid, and now people are not. When I, came out publicly in 1981 and said I was a witch, that was a crazy, almost self-destructive thing to do. I mean, it's astonishing that I was able to continue to have a good law career. And when I was super public, as you saw in the 90s, when I was doing tons of stuff, it affected my law practice. I suffered for that publicity. Now people wear that word as a badge of honor. That's a big change. That's a big change. Huge. You know, I mean, I had to articulate, you know, the witch was a feminist icon, you know, that I did it in order to confront patriarchy with its misogyny. You don't have to say that anymore, you know, especially young women and you know, people who are non-binary and stuff, they get it. You know, you put on that label, and it's a declaration of resistance in a certain sense, right, of something else. But now it's like, it's popular. I mean, I worry, you know, that people say it without understanding the full implications, because there are responsibilities that go with that word. You know, you need to know what you're doing, and you need to know why you're doing it, and why you're doing it is about more than you. Right? You know, I think a lot of people get drawn to it initially for the power, or the anticipation of the power that it's going to give them, and the sense of rebellion that they need to express, which needs to be expressed. But ultimately, it's not just about you, right? It's about where you are and why you're here. Why you, yes, you are here, right? So the you is really important, because there's a reason why each of us is here. Each of us is very unique. We each have a specific shadow to grapple with and gift to offer. There's a reason that we're here. We have a role to play. But with that word, you know, to be a witch is to be a wise one. Right? It's to be in service. And so, you know, good. Welcome to the club. Wear it. And now you need to work it. You need to do the work that gives that word its meaning, because the witch was, right? The witch was the seer of the sacred, was the creator of ceremony, the keeper of the stories, the old ways, the maker of the magic, the healer, the midwife of babies, but also of souls crossing over. With that word comes a responsibility of service to something greater than yourself. But the gift of learning how to do that is that when you serve something greater than yourself, it makes you greater than you ever could have imagined you could be. You know, and the things that you long for and the things that you want to create with your magic are very simple, you know, very fundamental, but they're also, you know, deep and wide and great and really needed. The world needs our witches.
Thank you.
Not just that we need witchcraft. The world needs our witches.
And thank you, Rachel, for thanking us for our conversation. So I guess as a last question, what would you hope that people would take away from this conversation in terms of understanding what the essence of Wicca is?
I think that there's a witch, a witcha, a Wiccan, a wise one in everybody. I really do. Because we're all children of Mother Earth. And I know that, you know, there's risk in any spiritual path thinking, you know, that it's the way, because there are many, many ways, right? And each culture has the one that's appropriate to it. But we're blessed to have the remembering of who we are and where we are and why we're here. And you don't have to be a witch to take that step into the realms of magic. They're inside of us and they're all around us. So if you want to take that step, you're welcome and you're needed. And there are many ways of rediscovering, why you're here, and of manifesting the magic of who you are. So, I don't know. What do you say? Take the next step. The path is a good path. It's a path home. It's a path home. It's not without a challenge, and it requires a measure of discipline, and work and courage. But it's extraordinary. I mean, my life has been amazing. Not without COVID, and not without crisis, and not without sorrow, and not without loss, but always with magic, always with magic. So.
Thank you. And before we wrap up, is there anything that you want to share about your work? By the way, your books are linked in the info box, so if people are interested in buying them, they can click the the Amazon link. But is there any other thing that you want my audience to know about your work, workshops, or how they can reach out if you have social media or?
Yeah, I do. I have social. I mean, it's insane to me. Like I just want to go out and be in the woods behind my house, which is usually where I am. But having been there for a long time now, I'm back and I'm really working like mad. I'm working as much as I can. So, after the pandemic, I did a lot of because of the pandemic. Suddenly, here I am. So, I have a website. I have newsletters. I'm doing a lot of teaching online. I'm teaching tomorrow with the Spells for Living Well book. I'm doing a 2-part class on spellcasting as spiritual praxis, which is both for people who've been casting for a while and people who've never cast a spell. I have like you, I have a Patreon circle because I needed a circle to work with. So I have a circle that meets every month, and I love working with them, and they're from all over the world. We have a lot of Italians and people from Holland and New Zealand and Australia and Mexico and the Caribbean islands and Canada and Scandinavia. I mean, it's amazing. And England, and people come and go, but there's also a group that comes every month, and it's such a joy. I wasn't sure about making magic online. Yeah, absolutely. You can make magic, and you can make magic in a closet. And you can definitely make magic online when you have good people to do it with, because the energy is everywhere. I'm teaching, I'm working on the next book, which is very much about nature's magic that you allowed me to talk so extensively about today. And I'm teaching, if not every month, a lot. So I'm trying to be out there as much as I can. And I'm doing private mentoring and doing readings with my deck, which has been a very moving experience for me, and to hear from people that they're working with it and that it's really responsive. We trusted the journey and what we were shown, and we trusted each other. I trusted her as an artist to interpret visually, and she trusted me as a writer to articulate. But we weren't sure if it would work, and it's working. And it's this incredibly benevolent, compassionate, wise presence that speaks to people, that when you were asking, like, you need to know, like, what's my dissertation subject? Like, it's right there, seeing the best of who we can be. So, yeah, I'm happy to work with people. Come help me do the work that the world needs doing.
There's somebody saying that they attended an amazing workshop with you called Dancing with Your Shadow.
I learned more in that than 20 years of therapy. Thank you. I'm very touched. The community in Italy has grown so amazingly, particularly with the care of Valeria Trisolio, who was the first priestess and initiated in Italy. Although, of course, the first priestess was Lorenza Menegoni, but she's worked primarily with Shamanism and the Foundation, and Dario Pastore and Amalia Dell'Aquila and Giulia Tarola, the priestesses of now. We have hundreds of initiates just in Italy, and a whole bunch of people who are dedicated and are going to become clergy, and more priests and priestesses. It just took root, which makes perfect sense. It really has taken root in Italy. And I think in part that's because we're so shamanic in our approach, right? That there's room for, if somebody is fascinated by a particular, if they're called by a Scandinavian deity, there's room for that. And if they want to really focus on rediscovering and drawing forth um, any of the many, indigenous modes within Italy itself. There's room. We don't. We're a big. We're a big circle. There's lots of room for that's the idea, is that everybody's path is unique, but we're all traveling in the same sacred landscape. And there are these core values at the heart that unite us. Yeah.
Sounds like a great way to end this conversation.
There we go.
Thank you so much, Phyllis, for accepting to be on my YouTube channel. And I will leave, obviously, your links in the info box, so everybody go check it out.
Thank you. It was a joy. And when you stop recording, we should talk for a few minutes. I want to talk to you about being at the Parliament of the World's Religions.
Yes, we will. So, when this ends, just don't leave this place. Sorry, everybody. We're just having like a private moment. But yeah, thank you again, Phyllis. It was really amazing.
It was a joy.
And as for you, my kind viewer, please don't forget to share this video with your friends, like and subscribe, and leave me a comment down below if you're watching this after the live stream. I always love to read your comments and know what you think about our conversation. And of course, as always, stay tuned for all the academic fun. Bye for now.